meeting and welcome you to one of our open government initiatives. Normally we meet at City Hall, but part of what staff are arranging is to move us around the city so that there are easier locations or more convenient locations. Certainly there's great parking at this one. And I'd like to thank everyone on staff for organizing this. I just would like to make sure, because some people arrived tonight thinking that this was the meeting for the pen visioning, for the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor Penitentiary visioning. The sign, I guess, was a little ambiguous on King Street. So we will be dealing with some regular planning agenda tonight, which is Burbrook Road, Davidson Street, and some business items. So if anyone's here for the penitentiary visioning, it's not happening this evening. And I'll tell you who I am. I'm Liz Schell. I'm the chair of the planning committee. We have my fellow members, Councillor McLaren, Councillor Osanek, Councillor Allen, and Vice Chair Councillor Neal. Our clerk is Derek O'Shea, and we have some planning staff and a new member, so we'll get him to introduce himself, but it's Planner Lambert, Planner Wicca, and
Sajid Safad.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Manager Vendetti. And I do have a planning notice, public meeting notice that I read at the beginning of every meeting that has a public meeting. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public meeting and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following the presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications. Unless otherwise noted, the public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in Bylaw number 2006-75 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications. Subject to delegated authority, Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. We do have a combined public meeting comprehensive report for zoning bylaw amendment for 22 Davidson Street. A decision will be made at the regular portion of the Planning Committee meeting tonight. Information gathered at public meetings is then referred back to Planning, Building, and Licensing Services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to Planning Committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council, and City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and anyone with an interest in the matter may file an appeal. Interested persons are advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. And with that, I will open our first public meeting. And it is an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1821 Burbrook Road. And I presume there is someone here who will give a presentation. Welcome. To describe the application. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public. My name is Bob Clark. I've been retained by Backyard Fencing and Chuck and Mitch to assist them in the preparation and approval of a zoning bylaw amendment to recognize the business that they have on the property. This is, as you'll recognize, an earlier photo which was taken when I first visited the property. I do note that since that time there has been a wooden fence, screening fence erected so that there is some further screening that is currently visible from Burrbrook Road here. I wanted to introduce Mitch and Chuck Bender, who are here. You can tell them by the hats. I may need them to assist me in answering any questions that are of a technical nature. I would indicate that they purchased the property almost 2 years ago. At that time, they needed a property for their fencing business, and this property had a workshop on it. They understood that that was being or had been used by a plumbing contractor. They moved their business here, and it wasn't until there was some discussion about the new entrance that they asked for and were approved for by the city that they were advised that they needed to seek a zoning approval. I guess our theme for tonight is fences make good neighbors, and we think good fencing companies make good neighbors as well. This is the location, and I'm sure most of you are very familiar with the location between Sunnyside Road and Coal Hill Road. I would characterize it as a rural area, and I think the planning documents do as well. Turning to the application itself, it is a site-specific zoning amendment to permit the existing 283 square meter building to be used as a workshop for a fencing business. The activities that are proposed on the site include an administration office for the business, parking of company trucks overnight, employee parking during the day, and delivery and temporary storage in the workshop of materials for current jobs. And there's approximately 1 delivery per month. In most cases, the fencing materials are delivered to the work site and not to this location. Employees do come to the site usually in the morning, and they are gone for usually the full day, where they return late in the afternoon, and the equipment is returned and they pick up their vehicles at that time. So that implies that there's very little additional traffic on Burrbrook Road, save for the employees in the morning, the vehicles leaving the facility, and then the employees in the evening. And occasionally and infrequently, there are deliveries to the facility itself. We prepared a concept plan, and I will acknowledge this was done prior to the construction that has taken place on the site. Its purpose was to illustrate the fact that there is a new driveway access, which is currently in place. There was an area for the parking of vehicles. As I've already indicated, employees park their vehicles there during the day, and the company vehicles are parked there in the evening. And the new driveway was created because the existing driveway is really an awkward access, serving principally the house that's already on the property. There is, I want to be clear, there's no intention to expand the business. The site plan, and as part of this approval process, there will be a site plan approval, formal approval, which will stipulate and regulate where the activity is to take place on the site and what improvements are to be made to the site. I suspect most of you are familiar with the property. It's an area of 12.33 acres or 4.99 hectares. It has a little bit over 95 meters of frontage on Burrbrook Road. The structures on the property include the residential dwelling and the workshop. The remainder of the lot, based on my review, is relatively flat, mostly clear of trees. There is a stream that bisects the property, and it's south of the accessory structure. Past use of the property was as a plumbing, I understand, was as a plumbing contractor, and there was a business that used the workshop. The adjacent land uses to the west, residential and another workshop. To the north are wooded lands and another residence. To the south is a wooded and there's an agricultural area, and then it goes into a less actively used agricultural area, and to the east is a wooded area and another residence. And I understand potentially another business there. Generally, it's a well-screened site. It is open from Burbrook Road, and I can indicate that the owners are willing to look at screening in the form of tree planting and fencing, if that is something that will assist the neighbors in their concerns with regard to any of the visual and other impacts of the property. Review of the planning documents. Provincial policy statement. In that policy statement, section 1.1.4 identifies that rural areas are important for the economic success of the province and quality of life. And they permit home occupations under section 1.1.5, home industries on rural lands, and outlines that economic opportunities should be promoted, which are compatible with the rural landscape and can be sustained by rural service levels. In our opinion, this is an ideal use, an ideal business for a rural area, principally because the main need of this is for parking. There's a limited services required because the employees principally work off-site. The city official plan designates the property as rural and environmental protection along the stream that I mentioned earlier. And in that rural and environment, in the rural section, it specifically permits small-scale industrial commercial uses, and they are to be limited in size and not to have adverse effects on adjacent land through either noise, vibration, reduction in privacy, or traffic. And all of the new small-scale industrial commercial uses that are to be allowed by amendment to the zoning bylaw, which is what we're seeking, and must set out specific limits on the use, size, location, and number of employees that are subject, and it is subject to site plan control, as I've already mentioned. So that is the policy of the city official plan. With respect to the zoning bylaw, the property is currently in a limited rural area. It's a restricted agricultural A1 zone, and the policy there requires that this use have a zoning bylaw amendment to recognize a small-scale industrial commercial use. And all the items outlined in the OPA will be regulated through site plan control, and that's, as I've mentioned, is the issues of the extent, size of the building, number of employees, and the nature of the improvements that are required for the building. And I wanted to make the point that this is a small scale, in my opinion at least. It's a small scale use. It's limited in size and activity, and it's not unlike the plumber that previously used the property. Most of the work is conducted off-site. The clients are not required to attend at the site, so there's no need to have traffic from people coming to the site as clients. And the activity on the site is limited to parking, storage, and equipment maintenance. There are a series of planning considerations, and the first of those that we've looked at is noise. There was a noise study conducted. That noise study was prepared by a qualified noise expert, J.E. Coulter Associates Limited. It was done in September of 2016. It concluded that there was loading of material. That was the concern with respect to noise. It does generate impulse sound levels, but those sound levels meet the ministry's noise criteria and without the need for additional noise control measures. I would also note that they take place in a very limited time frame. It's usually the loading of the trucks, the unloading of the trucks, and the infrequent material that is delivered to the site. All other operations, such as loaders and truck movements, meet the noise criteria without further noise control measures. That was the conclusion of the noise expert that was retained. With respect to scale, I've already referred to the fact that this is a small company, provides employment for 10 employees. The site plan control will set out and limit the areas of the business activities, such as parking and loading. With respect to compatibility, the workshop is well set back from the road and from neighbors. The business hours that are proposed are from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, and That will also limit the noise generation, because that is the time in which any noise, and there's a limited amount of noise, would take place from the property. With respect to traffic, Burbrook Road is categorized as an arterial road, and therefore it's more than adequate capacity for the limited amount of traffic that would be generated from this business, and I've already alluded to the nature of the traffic that would come from this business. With respect to outdoor storage, permanent outdoor storage is not proposed on the site. The materials are typically delivered to the job site. There may be temporary storage of materials which will ultimately be used, be transported to the job site for use there. Our conclusions then are that the land use is appropriate in a rural area. It meets the provincial and the city planning policy, provides an opportunity for a local small business. The noise has been assessed. It meets the ministry guidelines, and no mitigation is required, although, as I've indicated, the owners are willing to look at mitigation in the form of fencing or planting of trees. Site plan control will be required. We understand that. It will provide regulation on the amount, location of things like parking and loading, and it will regulate the scale. There will be limited business hours, and the workshop setback and screening from the road will mitigate the impact on residential neighbors. It's our opinion that adding the workshop as a permitted accessory use is appropriate in this location and represents sound planning policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I realize I didn't introduce, we have two of our IT specialists here, Mr. Coleman and Mr. Legault, and we also have our city clerk, Mr. Bolinonia, and another clerk, Thompson. So we do have quite a few staff members here this evening. So the first part of this meeting, I'm going to open it to the committee for questions. Oh, sorry, for staff, to hear from staff first, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. There was a sign posted on the property, and 13 properties were notified surrounding the 120 meters of the property, and it was also in the WIG. There were 6 pieces of correspondence received to date, and you've received those as an addendum. And there was also an inquiry from Mr. Skibo, who you'll be hearing from shortly, and we met and discussed it as well.
Very good, thank you. And questions from the committee? Councillor Neal?
Just a couple, if I might, and if staff or wish not to answer now, but give, I'm sure these are issues that will probably come up from the public, but I'm trying to get my head around the definition of a home-based business. It was my understanding under the official plan that that requires it to be an occupant business, and that it's a very limited number, perhaps only 1 or 2 employees of that home-based business. I believe that's how the official plan reads. So I have a question as to why this wouldn't require an official plan amendment as well as a zoning application. So staff now or at the end could probably respond to that.
Ms. Vendetti?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. There's a distinction between a home-based business and a small-scale rural commercial business or rural commercial industry. They're identified differently in the official plan. There's specific policies that speak to rural commercial uses and rural industrial uses, and it indicates that they can be a small-scale use compatible with the area, given that there's different characteristics. So home occupation is limited to 25% of the floor area of a house. One employee outside of the dwelling is permitted to be employed through a home occupation. So a home occupation is of a smaller scale. It's to be within the house, not within an accessory building or an outbuilding on the property.
So residency on the property in a rural application isn't required?
It's a different policy set with respect to commercial in the rural area and commercial industry within the rural area at a smaller scale, yes.
Okay. Have we had an opportunity, because I know it's both designated rural and environmental protection area. I know from some of the correspondence that I've read that there has been some infill and leveling that's taken place. Has any of that happened on the environmental protection area?
Mr. Wicca?
Through you, Madam Chair, my understanding is that the engineering department is currently in discussions with the property owners, and they're working out some of the details of that right now about what's been happening on the site in terms of site alteration.
So there is some site work going on now, but we're not, and engineering is looking into it. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to the public delegations. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question about the noise study. And where was the noise study done from? Like, did it have to go to the neighboring adjacent lands?
No, it didn't. The noise levels were taken at a distance from the operating, the various operations that are taking place, and then they mathematically can determine what the level would be at the receptor. So there was no need. I know that was one of the concerns, was that there was trespass on properties. That was not the case. That they can predict noise levels once they have the noise reading at a certain distance from the operation.
Okay, and the readings that they got said that it was within the guidelines of adjacent lands to like the neighbors around?
Yes, it did.
Okay, and did that have to include engine brakes as well?
No,
Do you know?
because the engine brakes are not something that I understand are used on site. I would defer to the owners, but I don't believe engine brakes are something that they use, that would be a noise generator. The noise generation was the loading and unloading of vehicles and the movement of vehicles on site. Those are the two noise generating actions that were measured.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Then I'm going to, sorry, Councillor Allen, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, you had indicated that the uses would primarily be parking, storage, and maintenance, but you also indicated that materials would be delivered from time to time. Could you clarify what that means? Because you had indicated that sometimes materials would be stored outside and sometimes they would not be. If deliveries are happening on a regular basis, that may, let's say daily basis, that may not be what I would consider a small-scale industrial use. It would be a constant, regular industrial use. And so I'm just trying to get a sense of what the deliveries and storage function would look like in this case.
Okay. During the past 6 months, they've kept. They provided us with the deliveries. There were 5 deliveries in the past 6 months.
Sorry, if you could just in the mic, so.
Certainly. And my understanding is there were in the past 6 months there were 5 deliveries. The deliveries are, as I understand them, are of materials that they need just to make sure that they have a supply of material available. Most of the material for their business is delivered directly to the site itself. And so these are just to make sure that they have a backup supply. They're stored temporarily on the site. They can be stored in the building, and then they're transported away.
Okay, thank you. And I may have missed this in the report. You say that employees will park here and then travel to the work site. How much parking are we seeking to make use of on this site?
We've got 10 spaces we're showing on the site.
Okay, and lastly, so the workshop that exists on the site, that currently that site's not zoned to recognize that use at this point, right?
No, as I indicated, the owners, when they purchased it, understood that it had been used as a workshop. It was their intention to continue to use it as a workshop, and it was only as a result of the fact that they applied for an entrance permit that the discussion came up that they needed to seek zoning. The business has been in operation for over a year, and I understand there have been no complaints.
Okay, just trying to get my head around sort of the situation here with the the use and the amount of use. I'll let the public make comments, and if I have any more questions, I'll ask them after.
And with that, I will open the public portion of the meeting. We'll be using the microphone. If you would like to come up to the microphone one at a time, we do have a 5-minute limit, but Mr. Skibo, we've already worked that out. If we could have your name and address, please. Sure. And 5-minute limit. We will gather up all of the questions, and at the very end, Mr. Clark will reply. He'll be taking notes so that he can answer all of your questions at the end. So with that, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Peter Skibo. I live at 1850 Burbrook Road, which is right across the road from the subject property. I'm actually a business consultant in the city, and I've had my own consulting practice since 1992. And in that time, I've helped establish almost 2,000 businesses in the Kingston area. 80% were home-based, and in fact, several were fencing contractors. So I have the unique position of actually having inside experience into the industry. I also sat on the Committee of Adjustment for 8 years until 2015, so I have a solid working knowledge of the official plan, the zoning bylaws, and the provincial policy statement. And I'm here this evening to speak against the zoning bylaw amendment because, in my opinion, it doesn't satisfy the intent of the official plan or the provincial policy statement. My wife and I, we built our home on Burbrook Road 14 years ago, and because of the high water table, we were not able to build our house into the ground. So because we built on top of the ground, the living areas of our house are effectively 25 to 35 feet above the surface of Burbrook Road. So in short, the noise that's generated by the traffic and the business activity that goes in and out of the compound is excessive, and it's problematic for us. Backyard fence, while they only incorporated in December 2015, the business has been in operation as a sole proprietorship for more than 16 years, and we confirmed that by pulling copies of the Yellow Pages ad going back to 2000. By my count, they have 7+ service vehicles. By their own admission, they have 10 employees, and they own significant business assets in both land, equipment, and inventory. They store equipment and materials at 2 locations, one being 1821 Burbrook Road, and the other being 1095 Sydenham Road. In summary, this is not a new or a small business, and it is certainly not a startup. It's actually very well established. So what does fencing contracting look like? Well, this is a copy of virtual fencing, and you've been provided a copy of these photos. Virtual fencing on Highway 2 East in Brockville, and this is the aerial photograph showing in the sort of the center zone the storage of equipment and on-site storage of materials. This is Walsh Fencing in Corbyville, and we can see lining their driveway the fence posts, and this is the aerial view showing a different perspective. Then we have Lennox Fence, which is located at Highway 41 in Napanee, and the second last photo shows the inventory on the very top right of the photo. And what's also worthy to note here are the piles of material from job sites that's typically trucked to their land, and this is very usual and very typical in the fencing industry. This is the applicant's property at 1095 Sydenham Road. We had this photo taken on November the 14th, and you do notice the outside storage of material, and it's pretty significant. There's also a storage container, there's equipment, there's a travel trailer, there's a culvert down at the bottom, and piles of excavated material. And then finally, this is 1821 Burbrook Road as it was seen on November the 14th. And again, we see the piles of fence posts, there are rolls of fencing, pardon me, there are piles of excavated non-native material, and there's also a garbage dumpster just in front of the red truck at the top that's emptied several times per week. Incidentally, this material has been sitting here since November the 14th, and it still sits there today. So Section 313.19 of the official plan has been cited by both the applicant's planner and the city's planners as it says that small-scale industrial and commercial uses in the rural designation can provide a modest means of starting a business. The businesses that grow are expected to move to more urban settings. And finally, the businesses must be limited in size, and that they must not have adverse effects on surrounding land uses. Well, 313.19 really doesn't apply in this case because the business is existing. It's actually very well established at 15+ years old. It's also a thriving business because it's grown beyond the point where it should be allowed to remain in this area. In fact, if this business had started in this area 5 years ago, it would now be considered to have grown beyond the point where it should be allowed to continue in this area. It's actually a large business, and it does not meet the intent of the official plan. It's not reasonable to expect that the business will operate from the workshop only, because fencing contracting requires significant land area to operate, as you've seen in the photos. And furthermore, in reality, the workshop, it's irrelevant to the operation of fencing contracting, and I confirmed that with my clients. Manufacturing is not performed on site, and 100% of the revenues are generated from activity that take place away at their client's site. The workshop is not needed for the operation of the business. This application is about allowing a non-conforming business to relocate and operate here by proxy, and by saying that a superfluous building is necessary for the operation of the business. Furthermore,
30 seconds.
thank you. The provincial policy statements don't support the application. They speak to permitted uses as including home occupations and home industries, and the business is neither classified as a home occupation or a home industry. The owner doesn't reside there, and they never have. And finally, there are additional areas of the policy statements that don't support the business. I'll leave that for you to read. On the noise feasibility study, it proposes that the business operates Monday to Friday 7 to 5, but these hours are not consistent with those that are worked in the fencing industry. And we also confirmed with the engineer, Mr. Patlick, he did not actually measure the noise that we hear in our house. I mentioned our house is up high, and we hear the noise very loudly, and in particular the sound of the engine brakes from the transports that come barreling down, and they slow down right in front of our property, and it is affecting us. So, in summary, the zoning bylaw amendment does not satisfy the intent of the official plan because the business is existing, it's well established. This business should be located in the general industrial zone. It doesn't conform to the policy statement, the provincial policy statement. The proposed business activities already have adverse effects on the surrounding land use and will continue to do so, and the noise study is invalid because it does not address the key noise issues. Finally, the site plan control measures can't mitigate the issues of traffic, noise, or the illegal outside storage that will continue as it always has. So in summary, what's going to happen if the zoning bylaw amendment is approved is we see the conversion of a rural area over to an industrial land. I don't think that's really intended by the official plan. So I respectfully request that the planning committee deny the application for zoning bylaw amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for providing the copies of your presentation.
Any questions?
No, we'll go on to the next, and then we will have a round of questions at the very end again. Thank you. Would the next person like to come up and speak? Yes, sir.
I'll let you take me down when we're getting close, because I'm bad at time.
Okay. Well, the clerk will tell me, and I'll tell you. Thank you.
Get the hook here. Okay. It's been contacted by
Could I get your name and address?
Yes, John Black, solicitor in Kingston.
And a little closer.
And a little closer so you
Yes.
can hear me? Okay. So Sonia Harmson and John Harmson, who are neighbors, contacted me to try and look at some of the legal aspects of this. And I won't go over the same points that were just raised. I think some of those were very validly represented. Suffice it to say, there's nothing to show that this was ever a legal non-conforming use, and it's not an application to attempt to replace the non-conforming use, but there's reference back to the business that was here before, like it was validly so. So let's clear that off the plate, okay? There's no indication of that. Then we go through, and even if we skip it trying to fit in, we say scale. And new small-scale industrial and commercial uses. And we've already looked at it. We've seen 10 employees, 10 vehicles. At one point, do you consider small scale? If you don't have a numeric figure, then let's get one, because we've heard about the frequency of vehicles and that sort of thing. Key concerns for my clients are an indication of increased noise, increased traffic, potential disturbance of the character of the area, types uses by much higher frequency use of the business with 10 employees and related vehicles, and potential environmental impact. Increased noise, there's a sound study done, which is great. What it finds is that by their estimates that it operates within the MOECC NPC 300 criteria. Well, that's not much of a release by a client. The beauty of this is we're not talking about a potential business there. It's been operating here for a year, so I'm not going to dwell on the noise. The other people who are here and have experienced the noise will be able to tell you the noise has been significant and has interfered with their enjoyment of their property, their enjoyment of their residences. I have limited time, we'll let them express that, but that is there. The estimates of potential noise impact are interesting, but again, we know the actual noise impact. And the sheer number of employees is of great concern. You're going to have vehicles in and out. The deliveries may not be that, but the noise impact's not related to two things. If you look at the study, it also goes down to some of the types of equipment that are going to be used on that site, which have a lower noise reference than the impact ones, which are well up over 100, I believe, if you look at the noise study. The application indicates storage. However, the noise feasibility impact study mentions minor repairs may take place very occasionally at page 3 of the study. Okay, this is expanding out. So obviously, the information that's coming out seems to be different for the planner than it's coming in for the noise study. At what point does this just expand out once you get permission? We've already seen where they've established the use. And first of all, nobody wishes their business ill. They wish them success. It's just, is the business a fit here? So this is not coming down hard on that. It's saying, should this be here? And so we're talking now about storage and repairs, not just storage. Increased traffic, it's already occurred with substantial fill, which has come onto there. My clients are concerned with flooding. This was actually, I believe, in breach of one of the bylaws that this was brought in, but it's now just been put on hold to say, well, if this gets passed, we can treat this through site plan control, and we can deal with lot grading. Well, it's in breach, and it's still in breach. The zoning bylaw hasn't passed, so it still remains in breach. So if this is the way you perform, and then you come in and ask for it afterwards, I'm not sure, once they get this, how far beyond the bylaw things could expand.
30 seconds, please.
Okay. Environmental, you can see from the diagrams where that exists. And we also have significant forest land, which is recognized and identified. So impact of each element should be made, not considering each one, traffic, noise, environmental. It's got to be taken as a whole. If you separate them down, any particular one may not seem cumulative to that great. But this is not for this area. A one-person employee, something of that, or even a couple. I can see that, but 10? No. 10?
Thank you very much. And would another person like to speak on this file? Because once I ask the proponent to speak, I'll be closing the public portion. So I encourage you, if you want to get up and speak, please do. Mr. Dixon?
Okay, so Frank Dixon, 485 Alfred, Apartment 2. So I don't live near the area. Just listen to the report and the presentations and so forth. So I thought the presentation was very good, but it might have been leaving out some key factors that were picked up by the people who've spoken since. Again, I'm supporting small business in general, and I want the business to prosper. But I'm wondering if it does continue to succeed, it could grow even beyond the 10 employees that it has now. So that would fit in with the concerns over whether it's fitting there now in terms of the criteria and definitions. I'm wondering if the workshop could possibly be used for some of the storage, which seems to be a problem on the site. The outdoor storage seems to be an issue people are raising. So, and then perhaps, if the house is there, is the house occupied? That wasn't really dealt with. Maybe it could be used also to extend the storage aspects. Speaking as a tech person, math, science background, I didn't see any specific noise information provided in terms of the attenuation caused by the coming and going of vehicles at certain distances. So I would want to see that if I was on the committee or if I lived nearby, because it's possible to create, you know, this sort of profile. And then I guess I'll conclude by saying that in general I'm concerned with the process here. In terms of the business is operating now, it's had a driveway installed and expanded, and then it was realized that there are issues with the conforming aspect of it. And then now you're coming here, right? So it's kind of jumbled up, and I have a concern with that. You know, like process in general, I'd like it to be followed. So again, I want the business to succeed, but perhaps a different you know, location is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Yes, please come forward.
Yes, my name is Sonia Harmson. I live at 1759 Burbrook Road. And the operation that was carried on has been going on for quite a while. And I was very concerned with the dumping that they were doing and the big rocks, et cetera, extended from the big shop that's there. And it's elevated way up high compared to what it was as a field. And I'm concerned also if that operation is going to be continuing, they're going to carry on dumping way back and flooding our lands, and the noise is going to continue. And we have property at 1801, which we later down the years like to sell it, and we're going to have a hell of a time selling it with the dumping and et cetera, if the city of Kingston would just go out and see what I'm talking about. I'd be more than happy to go out and show you what I'm talking about. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will ask Mr. Clark to respond to some of the issues that have been brought up, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond. With respect to the workshop not being required, the workshop is there because there is occasionally a requirement for repairs of equipment. I mean, they are running equipment, and the workshop is required for both repair of their existing equipment. There's not an intention to open a repair shop for anybody else. That'll be restricted in zoning. But so they have their own equipment that they repair and maintain. And yes, some of the storage does take place in the building itself. And I've seen that when I visited the property. Obviously, you've heard my opinion with respect to the provincial policy statement. In my opinion, this is quite a reasonable use in a rural area, and I think we have examples of this kind of use throughout the city, where there is not a strong requirement for where employees are not working on site, but there is a requirement for limited storage of material and equipment in order to support the business. With respect to the other fencing contractors, I've certainly seen other fencing contractors, and they don't have the extensive storage. That is my understanding, is that is not the intent here, that there would be extensive storage, as has been illustrated graphically to you. With respect to the noise study, a qualified individual looked at the noise generating on site. The noise that I understand you're being asked to consider is the noise that takes place on the road itself. And I think that's a significant difference in looking at this type of facility. The braking and the action of vehicles coming and going is principally related to the road itself, not to the operation. Yes, there was concern, I understand, about the fill that has been placed on the property. I think that's a technicality with the Conservation Authority. The intention is that will be resolved. It will be resolved in two ways. One, in consultation with the Conservation Authority, but more importantly, with the site plan approval, there will be requirement for an engineering review to ensure that the drainage that will be affected by the material that's being placed on the property is treated in such a way that the drainage will be properly mitigated and will not have an effect on the receiving stream. With respect to the process, I think my clients have explained what happened here. They thought they were buying a use which had a workshop. They've only found out after the fact that that was not the case, and they've taken the proper actions to attempt to address that concern. I think those are the notes that I made.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? I have one. Oh, go ahead. Thanks. Just to respond to that this was never a legal non-conforming use. It's the workshop itself that the understanding is that was the non-conforming use that.
We're not making that claim, and I haven't done the research to make that claim.
I see.
I'm merely saying that when it was purchased, there is a workshop on the property. It suits my client's purposes. They understood that there was a plumbing contractor using it, and they made the assumption that it was legal. They only found out after the fact that it was not, and they're attempting to resolve that.
Thank you. And the question of the fill, there could be quite a lot of changes happening once the engineering report and CRCA report comes in. Is that
That's possible.
Our understanding that there could be quite a change?
It is my client's intention to resolve the issue of fill. They admitted that they put fill on the property. They're operating a business. They need to have some storage space for vehicles, principally, and they admit that they have placed fill on the property. That will be resolved through a proper engineering review.
Thank you. And Councillor Neal?
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up to Councillor Schell's comments. I too am a little bit troubled by the fact that there's a pre-existing fill situation that is now going to be resolved by a future property standards agreement, and they're seeking post-fact the Conservation Authority approval for what's already been done. I find that troubling, to say the least. So I would really, really appreciate whenever the comprehensive report comes forward that it addresses specifically that there has been no impact and no intended impact on the environmental protection area, and there's been mention of recognition of forested nature of the property. I would like some assurances that both the current and no future expansion will be taking away any of the tree cover. And I just want to say, I think the comprehensive report, when it comes forward with whatever the recommendation, needs to clearly identify what I think were very valid issues that were brought up tonight about land use under our official plan, under the PPS, and under the proposed zoning amendment as well, because I think those are all substantial issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know it's difficult to see me right beside you when we're used to
You'll have to
looking at
wave
each other.
harder.
Through you, I actually have I think my questions are primarily for staff. One is, I know that our official plan update that we're currently undertaking is looking at directing small-scale industrial uses or regular industrial uses in the rural area to be more adjacent to each other rather than spread out. Does that policy currently exists in our current official plan? Have we modified or added to that, or is that something new that we're sort of adding to help intensify or prevent conflicts of use? Sorry, I only thought of that during the presentation, so I would have let you know in advance.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. We can respond back to that in more detail through the comprehensive report.
I would appreciate that in the comprehensive report. In addition, I guess some of these fill issues that neighbors have brought up or whatever, I just would like to say out loud that we're undertaking a review of our site alteration bylaw right now, and some of that consideration may need to be input or considered as part of that site alteration bylaw. In terms of making sure that we're getting ahead of things. The other thing is, I don't know if this is regular for public meeting reports, but I do appreciate it in comprehensive reports when we see an application history or history of a site, or if we can access that kind of information through Dash or something like that, so that at least the planning committee can understand what the story of this property is. Because I think one of the challenges we're having is, when did this building come here? Was there a building permit? Was there approved use associated with it? And was it legal at that time? And because the folks in front of us here today have purchased it under the impression that it was. And we're getting a sense that maybe we're not quite there. So it'd just be good to understand the whole story in the comprehensive report. Thank you.
Councillor Neal?
Just very quickly, every time my colleague speaks, I always think of something I wish I'd said. The whole issue of the former existing use, I think there's two issues there. There is existing zoning. If the previous owner did not comply with that zoning for whatever reason, if you change the use when you sell the property, correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't an application of existing non-conforming use. If it was an existing non-conforming plumbing contractor, and you were a plumbing contractor and you didn't intend to change any of the footprints or expand that existing non-conforming use would follow. But it's my understanding if you change the nature of that, which is what this zoning bylaw amendment is seeking to do, whether it was legal or illegal to be having a plumbing business there, I don't think is relevant to this application. Perhaps you could, staff could correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're good at that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Legal non-conforming uses are a little bit complicated in terms of determining how long they've existed, when they were established, were they legally, they have to have been legally established before the current bylaw was in effect. I don't know the history of this property with respect to the use in this structure, and we can look into it to report back in the comprehensive report. But what we have before us is a zoning amendment application to legalize the use that's proposed to be there through this application, irrespective of any previous uses within that structure.
Thank you.
Thank you. This file will now be back with staff, and if any of you have been discussing this file with Planner Wicca, please continue, because this is now an ongoing file, and the report is going to be written as staff discuss, and the technical reports come in, and CRCA is involved. So we're not anywhere near the end of this whole discussion. So please keep in touch with the staff members and your respective experts. So thank you very, very much for your presentation, and with that I will close this public meeting. Thank you. And I will open our second public meeting, which is an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 22 Davidson Street.
Arnie, you
Are
good?
you gonna cut out?
Oh, should I? Or
Well, no, it's totally up to you. If you
do I
want
need to? Should I wait for anything else?
If you want to talk about this too, we can have some coffee together.
I don't think you have anything else on the agenda.
Yeah. You were worried about another one too.
I got basketball.
Thank you, everyone. We do have another presentation now for 22 Davidson Street. If you'd like to go out into the hall and continue your conversation, please do.
So that seems to be just
Sorry, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I can have my coffee.
Order, please. We'd like to have our next presentation on 22 Davidson Street. I think we're okay. Please go ahead. We'll be able to hear you.
Madam Chairman and members of the committee and city staff that are present, I'd like to thank you very much for hearing our application.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
So this application is for a zoning bylaw amendment at 22 Davidson Street. What I am requesting is a relief from section 5.2b of the zoning bylaw 8499, which prohibits habitable, sorry,
yeah, just tilted towards you. Yeah, there you go.
prohibits, that's better, eh? Habitable space within a cellar, as defined by the ZBL, and therefore to bring the bedroom into compliance with city bylaws to enable the safe and legal use of the bedroom, recreation room, and bathroom that are in the basement. This is a satellite view. I'm not sure why it specifies Alwington on the map, but it was the best that I could do when I was chopping and clipping. Really, Davidson is a very short street. It's 2 blocks long, and it might be the shortest street in the city. I don't know. But it is bordered really by Union and King, and beautifully located besides St. Mary's on the Lake and close to the university. And Barron's grocery store. And this is a view from the street. And so the context of this application is that I lived next door with my family and my 2 kids I lived at 24 Davidson for 18 years. So that's the adjoining structure. And 22 Davidson Street was a rental throughout that whole time. In fact, our home was a rental before we moved into it and lived in it for that 18 years. And then we purchased 22 Davidson from the previous landlord approximately 2006. So it's been a rental in the entirety of its life, as far as I can figure. So this proposed zoning application does not require any exterior changes to the built form at all. It has 2 parking spaces at the front of the house, which have existed since the inception of the building, and it's really a very tiny backyard, so there's not possible for backyard parking. And this is congruent with the semi-detached at 24 Davidson, where we used to live, that their parking is in the front as well. There are no plans to change the existing pavement or parking space. The egress for the basement bedroom is by either the stairs or a separate entrance or window, and I have a slide of the new and enlarged window that we've installed. The change will make conversion of that building back to a single-family dwelling more appealing probably to future purchasers or to myself if I were to move back there. To have a family room in addition to the living room would be highly desirable. The neighborhood is already mixed with privately owned and lived-in properties as well as rentals. And in fact, this property, 22 and 24 Davidson, is surrounded by all owner-occupied houses across the street on each corner. But throughout the streets abiding, there are mixed uses. So the small scale of this application for change doesn't really affect the balance between intensification and respect for the neighborhood that we need to all consider in our applications. This is a floor plan. Unfortunately, the professional that drew this up just used our original drawing, so ignore anything on the right-hand side. But you'll see that the basement has a small bedroom, sort of a wet bar area and a washroom, in addition to laundry and furnace facilities. This shows you the large window egress that is, I think it's 3.2 square feet or something that's supposed to be minimal. So it complies with that now. And there was previously a two-sided sink, and that's been replaced with a 12-inch bar sink, which was required by enforcement. So my conclusion is that I'm requesting this zoning bylaw amendment as appropriate and consistent with the provincial policy statement, the City of Kingston official plan, and the zoning bylaw number 8499. The approval of a cellar bedroom is as habitable, will not alter the existing form of the current property, and that we didn't receive any concerns from adjacent landowners as I sent out emails, with the exception that as a street, we generally have a concern with a long-standing complaint of street parking because St. Mary's on the Lake is right beside us. So that's been a chronic kind of issue. I'm wondering if you have any questions.
Thank you. First, I'll hear from staff, please.
Madam Chair, the notice requirements for this application were met in accordance with the Planning Act, and there's been no correspondence received to date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Councillor Neal?
Just very quickly, former councillor Glover and I seldom differed, but we differed on the whole question of cellar units. I supported the idea of allowing for cellar dwellings rather than having a blanket refusal. I'm just surprised what parameters of that cellar restriction apply to this one, because I thought we had resolved that mostly. And I'll ask the same question of staff or of the presenter that I always ask. All aspects of the building will meet building code requirements for soundproofing, fireproofing, all of that.
Ms. Vendetti?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's on. When we did the zoning bylaw amendment for the secondary suites in the pilot project area, the prohibition against dwelling units and cellars was removed from the zoning bylaws for the former Kingston Township, for former Pittsburgh Township, and for some areas within the city, but it was left in as a general prohibition for the core area of the municipality. So, and that was because of some of the older housing stock and some of the concerns with respect to cellars being used. So it is proposed to be removed across the board coming forward in the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and at this point, as long as it complies with building code requirements in terms of egress, natural lighting, and those parameters, planning has no concerns with respect to it.
I have to say that's probably the Bill Glover influence on that portion of the bylaw, and I'm glad to hear that the new zoning bylaw will recognize it uniformly across the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Mr. Dixon. So I'll ask if you'd like to step aside for a moment, and Mr. Dixon will make his remarks.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a couple of minor points. I didn't see in the report anything on the original date of the house construction. And it is in a relatively mature area. So I'm just wondering if there are some heritage aspects there. Like the presenter stated that the in-front driveway had been there for ever since the house was built. Well, I'm not sure if that's the case. It was built in the 1800s, right? So we don't know when the house was built. What I'm saying is it's not in there. So how do you judge it, right? And I guess my final point is I'm just wanting to clarify that the cellar becoming habitable, that's not a separate unit on its own. It's part of an existing unit, right? I just want to clarify that, because having lived in basement apartment that was actually deemed illegal myself, I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, and then not knowing it was illegal, and I was there, so. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Seeing none, if you'd like to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Dixon. I believe that the semi-detached houses were built in the 1960s. And in answer to your second question, no, it is not a separate suite.
In favor? That's carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes of Thursday, November 17th. Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Osanic. And I did send a complimentary note to Mr. O'Shea. That was quite the task. Well done. Any errors, omissions, comments? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. No delegations, briefings. And our first item of business is the application for zoning bylaw amendment 22 Davidson Street. And we do have a staff recommendation. Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor McLaren. Any comments? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. And the second is the application for zoning bylaw amendment 1110 and 1112 Sunnyside Road. And again, there is a recommendation from staff to approve. All those in favor? Or sorry, a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Osanic.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Neal. Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Both of this and the next report probably have similar questions, seeing as they're similarly located. I don't know if I need to speak in. Well, I'll speak in the mic because we're recording this.
Yeah.
I guess a couple of the questions is, and they actually came up in the previous public meeting, and that is when I read through the report, part of what we were talking about was the rural area and rural economy and ensuring that small businesses thrive. I think one of the questions really is, what is a small business and what is the limitation of a small business, as these businesses have existed there and grown and now seek for us to essentially zone what already exists and allow that the former small businesses that have grown into slightly larger businesses be approved in their current form. So my concern is about the size of these conforming businesses or non-conforming businesses, and the fact that this is, to me, the rural councillor, this is my suburb. This is the one suburb I have with a community center and playing fields and houses that are kind of close to each other. And so my concern is if these uses, as we bring forward, if we approve these uses, are we bringing in more of an industrial use to what I would consider a residential neighborhood? So if you could please comment on the industrial uses in a residential neighborhood and the sense of, like, these are small businesses that have grown. What happens if they grow again under the current zone that we're proposing?
Ms. Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I think page 56 of the agenda package provides the official plan designations for the site. Both sites are located in the rural designation, and so staff were charged with reviewing the applications under that policy set. Surrounding the site, including the community center, those lands are all located in the hamlet designation, so the site is surrounded by a hamlet designation. Staff have worked with the applicant closely in terms of incorporating as many zoning controls as we could into the zoning bylaw to cap the gross floor area of both sites at what is presented on the site plan. So if the zoning were to be approved, they wouldn't be able to construct further additions without seeking a further zoning bylaw amendment. Staff have incorporated setbacks, have limited the height to less than what's permitted in the parent M2 zone, have regulated open storage. In the case of Oosterhoff, open storage is prohibited. In the case of Williams Paving, it's limited to a certain location of the property, well away from any residential abutting property lines. Staff are securing a road widening through the application as well, through the site plan control application, which staff are processing concurrently. And the use. There are a number of uses, industrial uses that are permitted in the parent M2 zone, including an assembly plant, manufacturing plant, and the recommendation before the committee for both Oosterhoff and Williams Paving limits the permitted use to only a tradesman shop or contractor's yard. And so if another user were to purchase the property and want to introduce a different industrial use, they would have to, again, go through a zoning bylaw amendment to receive approval to establish that use on the property.
Thank you. Just to follow up, so you, essentially, with the site-specific zoning, so in respect to what we have in front of us, the Oosterhoff property, they're proposing an additional building on the site for storage, correct? Indoor storage of vehicles, and and with that proposal, this zone will limit the buildings, the two that exist and that building will be limited there, and no other use other than identified in the zone will be able to take place on site. But if we don't adopt this zone, the risk is that other uses could be introduced that are not limited because the current zone is broader. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Madam Chair, the current zoning for both sites is a mixed zoning. The property does also contain a residential use, a 4-unit residential use, which staff have confirmed through the technical review of the application is a legal non-conforming use. Staff have not regularized that use through the recommendation, so it's the intent that that use would go away over time. But again, with both bylaws before the committee, the permitted use is limited to the tradesman shop and contractor's yard.
Ms. Vendetti?
Through you, Madam Chair, just if you look at page 57 of your agenda package, the schedule shows the existing zoning that applies to the property. So the existing property is a mix of an R2 zone, an A1 zone, and it looks like there's some institutional zoning on it as well based on that mapping. If you then switch back to page 56, which is the more recent official plan mapping, the 2010 official plan mapping, it shows the designation on the property as environmental protection and rural. So the zoning that exists on the property today, the split zoning that's there, is from the 1976 zoning bylaw. So it itself is not in line with the official plan. The zoning application is requesting to regularize the use that's there. And to do that, the proposal is to rezone it from an R2 zone, which is a residential zone, and an A zone, which is a restricted rural zone, to bring the property into one zone. The reason it's going into an industrial zone is because that zone that's being proposed is a site-specific zone to recognize what's on the property. So as it sits today, a contractor's shop couldn't go there, or assembly or manufacturing. But based on the review of the application and the review of the impacts and what's proposed for the site, staff are proposing the industrial zone, but we're proposing a limited scale industrial zone to recognize what's there today and limit the floor area of the buildings, limit the number of staff, limit the number of parking spaces, so that it meets the intent of the official plan with respect to limiting the scale of the operation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you going through that detail. I guess the one last question sort of related to this, and this came up when we spoke about Tomlinson's rezoning, which was quite controversial, which is in the same neighborhood, essentially, and was essentially the same sort of proposed approach, which was a limited site-specific zone, light industrial. And I guess my concern is that we say we take planning applications on a site-by-site basis, and generally we do a pretty good job of that. But by establishing 2 more zones that are light industrial, we're shifting the balance in what I would consider a residential zone. And I'm worried that that would create incentive for individuals to buy residential property at a low price and then start to use it for industrial uses and then seek to have that rezoned because once they've established the use as an industrial property on a residential property, they seem to be able to get away with that. In this case, we had a rural designation which allows for a small trades shop of some sort, and I think that the limit of that is difficult to define. Unlike what we heard at the public meeting, this has existed, these businesses have existed for a long time at these locations, and so that's a lot more difficult to deal with in terms of non-conforming use. But I guess my concern is, like, as a counselor looking at the vision for the neighborhood and looking at what we kind of seek to have happen in that neighborhood, my concern is that we're going to move it from a residential neighborhood because it's so close to the 401. It's attractive for industrial uses. It's very attractive for industrial uses, and by seeking to rezone these, we're going to head down that road. And so I'm hoping you can help address that concern. Because I don't mind supporting it because I know it's limited and we have to have something come back. But what I keep starting to run into is these applications where things have changed and they're seeking to bring it into conformity, and all we can do is bring it into conformity because they're existing and non-conforming. And I know some of that has to do with our out-of-date zoning bylaws, but I guess, like, I'm concerned that things will grow again and we'll be in the same position where we have that growth. So we'll either grow on these properties, so what's to prevent the uses from growing on these properties, and what's to prevent additional properties from becoming site-specific zones that are industrial in this neighborhood?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, with respect to the 2 subject sites, there are a lot of constraints on the site in terms of further growth. Staff are recommending controls, as I indicated previously, in terms of the gross floor area and setbacks and that sort of thing. In the case of the Oosterhoff property, staff were able to implement or recommend a 30-meter setback from the watercourse, which precludes development within that area for buildings and septic systems. With all the setbacks and the zoning controls, the constraints of the site, there is limited ability for them to come in and request another zoning amendment to grow on the site. So this really, staff understand this is pretty much it for this, the potential of these sites for the use being recommended.
How do we write that in? Sorry, go ahead.
So just to add to that, these applications have been in process for quite some time. We've had a number of meetings with both landowners, and we've been very clear in terms of expressing that we're able to support what's in front of us today, but there are limitations on scale and there are limitations on size, and we need to look at the impact, and that we may be supporting what's in front of us today. However, any future expansion on these properties, there were discussions with respect to the policies of the official plan and the fact that if you grow beyond where you are today, and we are limiting the scale and scope of what it is you're able to do on these properties, that we may not be in a position to support any future expansion on your property. So those discussions have been had with the applicant. I recognize the zoning can't say you are not allowed to expand on the property. However, we've limited the gross floor area of the buildings. Like, the zoning is tied down pretty much as tight as it can be tied down to ensure that there are no more employees than what's proposed through the zoning, that there's no more gross floor area than what's proposed through the zoning. With respect to the location of these lots, and I appreciate your concern with respect to the potential for industrial properties or properties like these, to expand and take over the area, and that's a concern of ours as well in terms of creating a threshold. In looking at these two particular sites that are in front of the committee this evening, they're on the edge of the area, adjacent to Sydenham Road. Recognizing the Osterhof site as interior, there is a water channel or the EPA area that sort of separates and acts as a dividing line there. These are larger lots in the scope of some of the smaller residential lots in the area, and we certainly would not be supporting the zoning amendments before the committee if these were interior lots to a residential neighborhood. As you mentioned, the proximity to the 401 access is very helpful for these businesses. But with respect to that, and as we heard through the other proposal tonight as well, the proposals, both of these operations are where people come or staff come, drop off their vehicles, and they leave the site for the day. So there's limited activity that's actually occurring on the properties as well. So all of those factors were taken into consideration in our review of this and resulting in the recommendations before the committee tonight.
I'll just finish with a quick comment, and that's just, it's a difficult situation. It's been a difficult situation for the neighborhood in general. I had something I was going to say. If I remember, Madam Chair, I may ask to speak again, but okay. It's left me. I'm going to drink some water.
Councillor Neal?
Yes. I found it reassuring that you've had a strong conversation about the limits of that development, because it does echo a little bit what we heard in the public meeting at the Burbank Road one as well. Because what we have, as I understand it, is a policy that allows for small industrial development in a rural zone with the understanding that any expansion beyond a modest expansion means that they don't get their zoning by right, and they should seek property in a light industrial, and boy, do we have some lots for you if they decided to do that. But, so I guess I have similar concerns that what we're doing, we seem to be agreeing to expansion now with the kind of strict understanding that this is the last time. But I'm concerned that what we're doing is possibly undermining the nature of what the rural zone is defined as, which is modest, a modest, light development, and an expansion is always with the expectation that you'll have to find another site. So I don't want to kind of rubber stamp these kinds of applications over and over again, because it undermines the intent of that. I believe it's an official plan statement about rural industrial development.
Yes, actually, Madam Chair, I do remember. It was simply to say that both of these businesses have existed for some time, and as in the public meeting earlier, I don't have any ill will towards these businesses, and in fact, like, they're growing and succeeding, which is why they need to ask for these things, essentially, which is great for our local economy. It's just balancing that priority with ensuring that our neighborhoods are livable and make sense is a challenge, and especially a challenge in everywhere in the rural area, but it's especially a challenge in these places where we're trying to define, give people the means to start things on their own property, but then know where they go going forward. I guess if a good question would be, I mean, obviously anybody can come forward with a proposal to amend and ask for a site-specific zone or another zone at any time. It's their right, they can do that. What do we have in terms of our policies that will help us say, no, you know what, actually you need to move to another area when we get those applications coming forward? Do we have, so if these 10 years from now these businesses have grown and they seek to amend this to knock down a building and build a larger building or have a larger workshop of some sort, and they say, well, we're already a light industrial zone, we have a light industrial zone next to us, we're like our own little business park here, how do we ensure that we can then direct them to a place where other businesses like them are thriving, and that the increased impacts that may come with that next level of expansion would be not realized on the residential neighbors or on a residential neighborhood. The real challenge here for me is the way this hamlet is structured, but also looking at the lines here, sorry. But the real challenge for me is that this is essentially a residential neighborhood for me, and I really hope to see good neighbors when we approve things like this and say, okay, this can work. And too often we hear stories where that's not the case, and so that's why we sit here very hesitant and wanting to help these businesses succeed, but not hurt the nature of our neighborhood that's there with them. So the question was how do we, what policies do we have in place to direct those future expansions so that we can feel okay that if they come forward with justifying for another expansion in this place, that we've got a place to send them and the policies to do it?
That's a big question. With respect to this particular situation, these properties do have constraints on them, as Ms. Lambert indicated. So essentially, what they're proposing today is the extent of what they're going to be able to do on these properties. That's been communicated to them. At a higher level, in terms of rural industrial expansion, there's a couple of things that we need to look towards in terms of, one is our employment land strategy that the municipality has. Businesses like these don't need urban services. They don't need to be within the urban area. So one of the things that needs to be considered, and again, I'm speaking at a high level, is a rural industrial area in terms of almost a rural industrial park where you could have uses similar to these, or the fencing contractor that don't require municipal services, but they require larger land areas for their business operation in terms of storage, and the larger contractors, shop buildings, and those types of things. In terms of how we make sure those are, or if we get a request for an expansion of one of these businesses, we have to look at it based on the policies of the official plan. The policies of the official plan speak to limited scale, limited impact, and that's what we have to look at in terms of what impact, if there is an expansion, are these going to have on the surrounding area. For example, another rural industrial business, Terra Nova Trust, that's located off of Division Street, north of the 401. They had to come back in. They did have a zoning on the site that limited their maximum gross floor area, but because of a change in the nature of their production, they needed more building area, but it wasn't actually changing their output. It was to accommodate equipment. So we supported that zoning bylaw amendment, and it was approved because although the floor area of the business was expanding, the impact and scope of what was occurring wasn't greatly changing. It was just due to technology change. So there's a number of factors that we have to review, and we do have to review each one on a specific basis to see what the surrounding land uses are, what the traffic impacts are, what the impacts are going to be on the abutting properties based on noise, what type of water or services are required by these businesses. So there's no nice, easy answer when it comes to looking at a rural industrial operation, but it has to be looked at specifically in terms of the context.
Okay, great. And I just, Ms. Lambert indicated that site plan was moving along concurrently, and I wanted to know if there was additional screening or plantings or visual improvements associated with, I mean, we're looking at Oosterhof right now, but either of them would work, but Oosterhof's what I'm asking about because that's what I'm permitted to ask about right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, yes, along the street frontage, there are a number of greening improvements along that frontage, including the planting of trees. The improvements are depicted on the site plan enclosed with the comprehensive reports. Staff will be securing that through securities gathered through the site plan process and the approved drawings should this zoning amendment be approved. There is also a landscaping strip that's been implemented for the Williams paving site on the eastern side that's incorporated into the zoning.
Thank you.
Councillor Neal.
Just very quickly, as you're speaking about this, I know you're suggesting that staff have spoken to both of these owners and that there's an understanding that this is the extension of the envelope of their expansion. How does that get relayed in some kind of a legacy document? Can we put the wording within the bylaw so it acts as a legacy document? Because quite frankly, 8 or 10 years ago, this same decision could be coming up and none of us will be sitting here. So is there some way to have the bylaw work as bylaws should as a kind of legacy document that's detail I know that doesn't normally go into a zoning bylaw? Perhaps you could address that.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's not something we're able to achieve through the zoning bylaw itself. But I can tell you that when a property comes in for a zoning bylaw amendment, one of the first things we do is look at the history of that property, the previous applications and the previous staff reports to see what the recommendations and conclusions were at that time. So while we may not all be here if one of these properties does come forward again, it has to be reviewed based on existing policy.
And that information can be put in, added to a comprehensive report
Absolutely.
that clearly states, or even an addendum to the current recommendation, comprehensive report, so that a future planner can see the rationale and our reluctance in taking this forward.
I guess any application for zoning bylaw amendment has to be reviewed against the policy that's in place at the time of that application. So regardless of what the past or the discussions we've had with these applicants, and I'm not saying they would be irrelevant, but what I'm saying is if in 10 years someone submits a zoning amendment application for one of these sites because they want to expand something, it would have to be reviewed based on the policy that exists at that time. So I'm not sure what the new official plan is going to say specifically with respect to this, but
Rich may be the only one that's still around in 10 years.
Not if I keep having meetings like this.
But it'll have to be reviewed in that context. But as I said, we always look at past applications, past application history, and that would be looked at the time and also brought forward and figure into the planner's analysis. Yes.
Okay. Very good. I think we're ready for the vote. And all those in favor? And 4 in favor? 5 in favor? Pardon me?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's tricky.
yeah, I'm gonna vote against it at this point.
Okay, then it carries 4 to 1. Thank you.
Like close.
Yes. And we do have one more right next door. The application for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment 1138 Sunnyside.
And we could
And-
just say IBIT.
Yes, 1397
Actually, I have different
Sunnyside
questions.
Road. Councillor Allen?
Pardon me, I have a couple specific questions for this one.
And then
So,
we'll put it on the floor.
yeah, and then we can put it on the floor afterwards. And mostly, I think I'm just confused as to where this proposed new building is going on this one. Is that on, along Sydenham Road, or is it along the current lot line? So like, because I see sort of 2 subject properties, and then I see the building, and from the report, it's not, I'm not, and it's probably because I read it really fast between announcements today. So I apologize for my lack of diligence on this report, but so if you look at page 91, we have the rezoning that's taking place essentially, and then we look on page 92, and we have a larger property that exists, and same on 93 and 94, and then we get to Exhibit G on page 96, where it talks about the proposed building and the existing 1-story office. And I'm just trying to tell if that's alongside Sydenham Road or if that's set back from Sydenham Road along the property. And maybe, I think if I zoom in, it looks like it's actually set back from Sydenham Road. It's not adjacent to Sydenham Road where that building was. I was a little concerned about the Heritage House down Sydenham Road, but I think I've got my buildings mixed up in the diagrams here. Can you just confirm that we're not close to 1345 Sydenham Road with this building, or what the distance is?
Ms. Lambert?
Through you, Madam Chair. On page 91, this project involves a lot addition application, and so that's where the official plan amendment comes in. The lot addition lands and lands to be severed are currently designated hamlet in the official plan, and so the recommendation is to redesignate those lands to be added to the site as rural. The proposed building is in the location of an existing building. If you follow the property line of 1138 right down to 1345, it would be located in that approximate location there, with the landscaping strip along that property line implemented through the recommended zoning.
Okay, I think I get it. It's on the current sort of developed portion of the total property. Looking on Google Maps, I can see sort of a roundish building with another squarish building at the back of it that clearly denotes it. I couldn't quite see it as clearly in my report, but I think, I guess I thought it was along Sydenham Road, and I just wanted to make sure that it was continued to be set back from Sydenham Road, and then that new building's going to be screened with that planting strip that you've referred to earlier, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. And if I may add, the rear yard setback of the building would be approximately 41 meters from the rear yard.
That's
that
most excellent answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? We do have a staff recommendation. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanic. Any further discussion? Then I'll call the question. All those in favor? And one nay.
One nay.
One nay. Thank you.
I like nay.
Well, it's the rule. We have to decide. And that concludes the business portion. We have no motions, notices of motion. We have any other business? Correspondence, we got our addendum. And the next meeting is Thursday, December 15th, somewhere.
My mic's not working, but I'll project. It'll be Memorial Hall.
Memorial
So
Hall.
we're back at City Hall at the very least. Thanks, Lee.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Oh, we just need the motion to adjourn.
Oh, motion to adjourn. Yeah. Councillor Osanek?
Councillor Allen seconds that.
And all those in favor? Sorry.